So yeah, welcome again, officially. My name is Kazu. For those of you that I haven't met, I'm a founder and one of the core members of the East Point Peace Academy. We're an organization based here in Oakland, and historically, we were a training organization that did a lot of work in prison. And we were actually in the process of reimagining ourselves as a social justice organization at this point in human history, even before COVID hit. And so we were already starting to think about what kind of organization we want to be. And in addition to being a training organization, we're moving towards being a community of practice, actually engaging in the practice of nonviolence in our communities, in the streets, out there in the world, in addition to the trainings that we do. And during COVID, we've obviously switched everything to virtual workshops. We've been doing lots and lots of virtual workshops on a bunch of different topics. And then as the election was coming up, we realized that we actually made the decision to stop all of our programming and focus exclusively on preparing our communities for the elections. And so during the month of October, we ended up doing 25 events, none of which were on our calendar on October 1st, which is wild. And so really, really blessed to have so many people step into leadership roles. And we had an incredible team of trainers and people putting together events. And obviously, we all got the news yesterday about the election results. And, I've been thinking a lot since then that this is a very well-deserved, like, deep breath and exhale and maybe a couple of days to relax. And we also have known for a long time that it's very likely that Biden was going to win the election. And after that, Trump was going to refuse to concede and was going to file all of these lawsuits and to try to steal the election in some undemocratic way after the election results have been called. And so we know that we need to be vigilant and that we need to be ready to continue to hit the streets and to continue to pressure this administration. And I think it's really important that we take this moment to rest, to reset, and also to celebrate. I think that the more we celebrate publicly, the harder it's actually going to get for the administration to try to steal this election, right? The more we're out there publicly celebrating and really putting the message out there that the election is over and Biden has won, the harder it's going to get for him. So I think it's really important that we continue to celebrate what happened yesterday. And, like I said, it's very possible that we may need to continue to push and continue to hit the streets depending on what happens tomorrow. Trump has made it very clear that on Monday, they're going to be filing more lawsuits. So this weekend, I think, is a really great time for us to be doing this call and trying to just like reset and recenter ourselves so that we can be in a place of sustained action. So we're really honored and privileged to have Staci Haines here with us. I started hearing about Staci's work before I heard her name. As someone who's been kind of in social change work for about 23 years, a while ago I started hearing about generative somatics. And like from all of these different sources, people kept telling me, oh, you have to attend the generative somatics thing. Generative somatics have helped me so much and helped my organization so much. And I always tried to do a generative somatics workshop, but for some reason the dates never aligned. And then about 6 years ago, I started doing a lot more trauma healing work in the prisons. And through kind of that work of doing a lot of trauma healing work, I started hearing Staci's name. Like other facilitators would bring in activities and say, oh, this came from Staci Haines, or this framework I'm about to present was from Staci Haines. And then eventually I put the two together and realized that Staci is the founder of Generative Somatics. And many of you who are familiar with my work may know that I'm really interested in the intersection between kind of nonviolent action and trauma healing work. And in kind of exploring that framing, obviously the work that Staci has been so helpful. And so I think in a moment like we are in now and today, when there is so much trauma manifesting at a collective level, and a time when we really need sustained nonviolent action, I think the work that Staci does is so crucial. So we're really grateful to have her. And so with that, I'm gonna hand it over to Staci to lead us through the next couple of hours. And yeah, really grateful to have you here. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Kazu. I'm really happy to be here too. And we got to present on a panel together, I don't know, maybe 2 months ago. And it was so great to finally have our worlds converge. So thank you. Happy to be here and really happy to support all the organizing and everything you all are doing. It feels very life affirming. So good morning. I'm so impressed that people, or good afternoon, wherever you are, but I'm so impressed everyone is like up and functioning. I said to Kazu at the beginning, I'm like, if no one comes because everyone is sleeping, because they're all so tired, we could just reschedule. So anyway, I'm so happy you all are here and look forward to our next, couple of hours together. So I want to say a little bit more about myself. Maybe it's just exactly what Kazu is passionate about, but in my own terms. I have this deep passion about the connections and the intersections between personal transformation and systemic transformation, and really feel like at their best, they're co-serving. I think at their worst, personal transformation gets absorbed into racial capitalism and individualism and becomes something else altogether that doesn't serve systemic transformation. But I think there's a lot of us, I often think of it as this kind of our generation's task to intercept these and make sure that all personal transformation has a deep social analysis, and then that folks who are doing organizing work and social change work have a lot of access to healing, to leadership development, right? To all the transformation that's a part of helping to change our world. So I worked first with Generation 5, and that's a social justice organization that was really looking at how do we deal with child sexual abuse as a systemic issue, a social issue. And that work really demanded that we interface and integrate personal and social change because it's so traumatizing a topic and very hard a topic for people to talk about for more than like 3 minutes at a time because it's so upsetting. And then eventually co-founded Generative Somatics with Spencer Kandawala, and then I've been at that for the last decade or so. Today is going to be a little bit of talking, practice together, some breakouts with each other. And then later in our session, there'll also be an opportunity for a demo. So you can start contemplating if you would like to do a demo with me as we go. And then there'll be plenty of time for Q&A. If you can kind of put your questions either in the chat or, when we stop for Q&A, you can raise hands and Kazu's going to help me either grab questions from the chat or call on people because it's hard to do this and read the chat at the same time, as you all know, as we spend our lives on Zoom. All right, I'm gonna dive in and talk a little bit about what is somatics to give us a framework for today. Some of you might be really familiar with it and others not. But somatics is basically an approach or a way to engage embodied transformation, right? So it's transformation or change that doesn't stop at the level of kind of ideas. I mean, I love ideas. I have no argument with them. But somatic transformation really has transformation or change show up in our actions. So one of the ways that we define transformation is that we know we've transformed when our actions align with our vision and our values, even under the same old pressures. Yeah. So we know we've transformed, and that could be personally or as a collective that we're a part of, right? Or as an organization or alliance. We know we transformed when our actions line up with our vision and values, even under the same old pressure. And why we use that last part is it's under pressure. And obviously, we are under sustained pressure, but it's under pressure that our reactivity pops out really quickly, right? And we can act a way or relate in a way or not act, right, in ways that aren't aligned with our visions and our values. So that's what we're looking at is through somatics. We transform in this holistic way, so we have more options when we're under pressure and when we're under sustained pressure. I'm going to share an image for a minute that just helps us kind of look at the different aspects of our methodology. And let me see if I can, that's probably as good as it's going to get. So these are different components of like the different parts of somatic transformation, and we'll be touching on each of these today. Somatic awareness means beginning to listen to and feel for the information that really comes through our sensations and comes through our emotions. So we ask a lot in this work, what are you noticing in your body? Where do you feel more movement, or where do you feel more numbness? Where do you feel more coolness or more warmth? And we really think about sensation as this kind of foundational language that if we can listen to the information that's coming through the body, we're gaining more information, we're gaining more choice. And it's also the first place that we react from happens in the sensation. So we can actually work with ourselves really early on rather than kind of after the fact. So somatic awareness, I'll be asking you a lot today. What are you noticing in your body? The second one in the red circle here is somatic practices. And kind of one of the phrases that we use is that we become what we practice, and we're always practicing something. And is what we're practicing aligned with what we most care about? So we think of most things as practices, all the way to the level of kind of our habitual way of breathing. Is that kind of serving us? We think about like, how do you have a centered boundary? Trauma and oppression does not often leave us with the skill of having boundaries that take care of ourselves and also take care of others. So a lot of those skills we need to relearn, and we can relearn those through practice, taking on purposeful practice. We even think of the capacity of giving and receiving love as an embodied practice. And often that practice got really either not learned or interrupted because of trauma and oppression. So there's a lot of practices, and we'll be doing some today. And then that third circle, the orange circle, is called somatic opening. And somatic opening is really taking kind of the patterns, the habits. We even think of belief systems as actually embodied phenomena. Somatic opening is when we can discover those habits, those survival strategies that actually live in our tissues, and we help them open up and process through all the way. And it's funny, you know, at some point in my own personal work in somatics and my learning of somatics, I really thought, God, the body just stores all these stories, and they get caught in us until those stories get to kind of come forward and process through and get integrated in some way. So somatic opening is really working with that part of the change process. And then lastly, of course, all this is always happening inside of a social context and social conditions. And I have to say that a lot of the somatic approaches in the US don't have a social analysis. And one of the things that was so important for us at Generative Somatics is that we bring a social analysis to this transformative work, right? The root causes of most trauma is oppression, right? The root cause of most trauma is oppression. And even very intimate traumas like child sexual abuse or like intimate partner violence really still has its roots in systems of oppression and exploitation. So having a social context really helps us much better understand where things are coming from. And also, because we always put healing and action together, it lets us become collectively more powerful actors for justice and for liberation. And then the last thing you'll see on the outside there is landscape and spirit. And you'll see as we talk about resilience today, because that's part of what we're going to dig into, that first of all, there's things much, much bigger than humans. And sometimes humans forget that. But we're both shaped by land, just like we shape and impact land and landscape. And then spirit, whatever you call it, is really those much, much bigger forces that can inspire us, inform us, have us ask very, very big questions about where do we all come from. But those things other than humans are also part of our makeup and influence us. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and come back. That's just to give you a baseline of like what are the components we're going to be working with today. I think the last thing, and then we'll get into some practice, is somatics is not just the body add-on, but somatics is really a different paradigm in how we understand people and how we understand change. So when I say soma or somatics, it means our thinking plus our emotions plus our sensations plus our actions plus how we relate. It's like the kind of, in some ways, the best word we have in English to understand ourselves as whole organisms interacting with others. Okay, so it's a little bit of a weird word, but I think it's the best we got at the moment. All right, so let me just pause for a minute. For any of you who are new to somatics or anybody who know the work and want to add anything, do you have any questions or comments before we kind of start to dive into practice together? And if you have a question or comment, feel free to use the raise hand function. Sorry, Kazu, go ahead.
No, I was just about to say that.
Okay, cool. Well, if you have questions as we go, you can either raise hand or also drop them in the chat. Ooh, here comes one. Hi, Meg. Do you want to say your question or do you want me to just respond in the chat?
I can say it. Hello.
Awesome. Hi, Meg.
Yeah. As I've been learning about somatics, it seems like there are different pieces of the field, and I've done a little bit of personal work with someone who does some semi-therapeutic work using somatic experiencing techniques. So, and I don't know if that's what you're referring to when you're talking about somatic practices that lack analysis. So wondering about the distinction connection to that field.
Yeah. I thank you for asking. So the lineage that I come from, so there's different kind of lineages. They really intersect in how they landed in the US. But the lineage that I come from really integrates hands-on work, somatic body work, and again, individual and collective practice. A lot of the somatic approaches that have really tried to get validated by Western therapeutic models have dropped out a lot of practice and have dropped out a lot of touch because that's not kind of in the therapy framework. Although Peter Levine's work, which is what you're talking about, is starting to integrate more body work again. But a lot of the approaches that have, again, tried to go mainstream therapy really highlight mostly somatic awareness, paying attention to what's in the body, then talking about it, and paying attention and talking about it. What happens with somatic body work or touch or somatic practice is often the body informs the mind, and there's just a body up learning. And yes, exactly. There's very few schools in the US, including somatic experiencing, that have a social analysis or talk about really the cultural appropriation in the lineage of the work. And we've done a lot of work. We have too long of a PowerPoint to share, but we have a very long PowerPoint on like, what is the complex lineage of this work? What has really been cultural appropriation? What's shaped by colonization and heteropatriarchy? It's just so important to look back and look forward when we're trying to use really an art for liberation. So I hope that wasn't too long of an answer, but okay, great. I love the other comment. I still don't know what it means, but I'll figure it out. Thank you. That's a great place to start. All right, so where I wanted to start today is to go into brief breakouts and have us each have about 3 minutes, but 3 minutes straight can be a long time, but 3 minutes to talk about what you're celebrating and how that feels in your body. You know, when Kazu and I picked this date, we had no idea what would be happening. And I'm like, oh God, some relief, right? That the answer came through yesterday. But what is it that you're celebrating and how does that celebrating feel in your body? And I'll just give one example for me. One of the things that I'm deeply celebrating is the level of leadership that has really come from Black and Brown communities over particularly this last year in such dire circumstances. And the national infrastructure for organizing that's been set up, that I just feel so excited about what we can then accomplish over these next 4 years because of how much organizing has gone into the pandemic, the uprisings, and also the election. So I'm really celebrating that, and how that feels in my body is my chest feels like it's coming open. I feel really warm across my chest. My back is relaxing, and my feet kind of feel like happy feet, like they want to dance. So that's how the celebration feels in my body. So whatever your celebration is, and it doesn't even have to do with the election if you don't want it to, but what are you celebrating and how does it feel in your body? Welcome back, everybody. I'm wondering if, as we're coming back, if folks can drop in the chat a couple of the things that you're celebrating. All right, so for those of you coming back, we're just dropping in the chat a couple of the things that you're celebrating. Feeling I can breathe deeply again, I relate to that one too. City of Atlanta, that's awesome. Right on. All right. So I want to invite us to continue to try on some somatic practice. And I'm reading the chat. I'm celebrating with you all. This is good. Inside of a somatic practice, there's always a purpose. So the form of the practice in some ways can be very flexible, but it's really the purpose of the practice that we're practicing in an intentional, repeated way to embody a new choice or embody a new option. So the practice, I'm going to introduce two practices. One is a centering practice, and one is a practice that takes centering into practicing how to be kind of in action and in change while we continue to practice centering, okay? I'm going to show the practice standing, but these practices can also be done seated. If that just works better for you today or better for your body in general, you can practice these also seated. Those of you who want to stand, let's go ahead and stand. And if you want to stay seated, that's fine too. So this first practice of centering is a basic practice that we come back to over and over again. And the principles that we're, practicing into our nervous system, into our tissues in this practice is how to be present, open, and on purpose. Okay, so present, open, and on purpose are what we're practicing inside of this. And again, seated is fine. I'm going to do standing. So the first thing we're going to do in this practice is, if you're standing, just kind of get your legs underneath your hips And make sure your knees aren't locked out. A lot of us learn to stand with our knees locked out. So just make sure your knees are just slightly bent. And then let's start by moving from kind of our thinking self into our feeling self. So bring your attention to sensations. You might notice where you feel warmer or where you feel cooler right now. You might also notice where you feel more pressure or where you feel more relaxation. But just keep coming from your thinking down into your feeling. Drop your attention down into the body. You might even notice movement, maybe your breath, your heart beating, your meal digesting. And just take a couple of deeper breaths, like you could breathe down your spine and come into yourself. And then place a hand just a couple inches below your belly button. And we're going to call this center. Yeah, when we're standing, this is our center of gravity. And this is a place that we're going to drop our attention and where we're going to organize ourselves from. Yeah. So anxiety in the body lives very high up in the chest. When we get anxious, our breath gets higher. A whole level of chemical change happens to move us into some kind of action. And when we're centered, it's physiologically very, very difficult to feel anxiety. So we're building this dropped open attention, right, as a home to come back to. And then from here, we're going to center in 4 directions. So from center, we're going to first center into length. And that's a kind of settling into gravity, settling into the lower body while we also lengthen up. Where you can just feeling into your height. Yeah, but letting yourself come into your full length. In these practices, we practice with our eyes open so we can really feel ourselves and be in the world at the same time, feel ourselves and be with each other at the same time. So centering in length, dropping down, lengthening up, coming into your full length. And we also look at this as centering in our dignity. Yeah, so feeling dignity or that inherent worth from the inside out. And then also recognizing it in each other. All right, so length. And then the next thing we do is center in width. So from your center line, go ahead and widen out. There's so many things about oppression, about racial capitalism that train us to shrink or train us to pop out of ourselves. Right? This practice is helping us going ahead and expanding and being inside of our own skins. Yeah. So go ahead and just widen across your collarbones. Our ribs are these amazing flexible structures. You can take a deep breath into your width, widen across your ribs. You can widen across your hips or any place else in your lower body, but expanding out into width. We also think of width as a social space where we can let ourselves out and we can also let people in, right? We can give out, we can receive. It's the place that will have boundaries. Yeah. Good. So we centered in length, we centered in width, and now we're going to center in depth. So backside all the way through to front side. And since so many of our sensing organs are in the front, let's feel our back bodies first. You might feel the backside of your heart, you might feel your glutes, but just sense and feel the backside of you. And then let your attention start to come to the inside of you. Just making maybe 2% or 3% more space in your depth. Yeah, all the way through to the front side. So we're not pulling back, we're not pushing forward, but we're present in our depth and expanding our depth, balanced in our depth. And same thing, see if you can take a breath and let your ribs expand front to back. Maybe you can feel the full depth of your head or the depth of your hips. Just coming back into our full bodies. Good, so centering in that length and dignity, centering in width, connection, centering in depth. And then the last thing that we always center on is who and what matters to you. Inside this work, we actually really craft a purpose. But right now we can just center on who matters to you and what matters to you. And let that really live down at your center, kind of not just as a concept, but letting ourselves go, no, this is what I'm about. This is who matters to me. And let that really inform your nervous system. Let that inform your muscles. Yeah, so we're practicing embodying our purpose, being very close with, having our purpose accessible to us. All right, length with depth, centering and purpose. That's a baseline practice that we come back to over and over again. I know we're only getting 2 hours together today, but this is a practice you could really take on just as a basic practice, centering 3 times a day. It could take 3 minutes to do it, or it could take 30 seconds to do it, but it lets us really get back inside of ourselves, fill out in ourselves, and center on purpose. All right, we're going to take this into action, right? Since we're mostly in action, we're mostly interacting, and we're dealing with a lot of change. How do we be centered and connected to purpose while also dealing with action and change? So I'm going to show it standing, and I'll also describe it seated. In a minute, we'll just put one foot in front of the other, or you can do it with me. I'm putting my left foot in front, but do whatever you want. If you're seated, you can do the same thing. Just put one foot forward. And then from center, and you can feel center again if you want, we're just going to rock forward, putting weight on the front leg, and then rock back. If you're seated, it'll just be a little bit of coming forward and coming back. So forward and back, forward and back. Just let yourself really feel moving from center. Okay, at some point in the practice, I'm going to say and change. And what will happen at that point is we'll switch legs. So we'll go other leg in front. Yeah, rocking back and forth. And we'll go and change. And the next leg comes forward. Same thing when you're seated. Okay, awesome. That is the baseline here. Now what we're going to do is also add, imagining that we're in a big boat together, and we're all going to pick up the oars together. So we pick up the oars and then bring it back to center. Good. Moving from center, having that base of your lower body, and then rowing together. If you want to add inhale, exhale. And just check in with your length, width, and depth. Yeah, we're practicing being in action as we center ourselves. It's really nice we're in a room together and can do this. It's so great to do this with 30 or 40 people all literally rowing together. All right, and since life is more complicated than this, we're going to add change. So it'll go like this, and change, And then that leg comes forward and we keep rowing. Feeling your body, reminding yourself of purpose, and change. And change. And change every time. Settling in the change, recentering in the change, and coming back to purpose in the change. Nice job. And hold. And then just take a minute, again, seated or standing, and just feel yourself. What's happening in your breath? Is there any movement that you feel in yourself? And not trying to change any of it, just kind of letting it be there, letting it run, making space for it. And then with that increased movement or energy or whatever's happening in you, just gently recenter yourself. Dropping your attention to your belly, gently recentering in length, recentering in width, recentering in depth. Yeah, just finding balance, length, width, depth. And then again, centering on who and what matters to you. Right? This is a way that we're purposefully practicing, right? Building new skills into ourselves and building this baseline of center that we can come back to. Yeah. All right, good. Let's come back together. Those of us who are standing, you can come back to seated. And then lastly, if you can just check in, kind of how's your mood in the moment? How's your emotional state in the moment? And just drop that into chat. You know, even over Zoom, when we're all these kind of little boxes for each other, it is so nice to practice collectively. Just like, okay, we're in it together practicing. All right. Going to shift into resilience in a moment, but I'm just wondering if there's anyone who wants to share how you're doing, or if you have a question or a comment that you want to add. If you do, if you can raise your hand.
See two hands. Maybe we'll start with Kat.
Thanks, Kazu. Hey, Kat.
Hey. I felt more grounded prior to doing the exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And what came up for me was I found some buried grief, but not buried too deeply. Kind of just sitting right there at the surface of my senses, and grief around who and what matters most to me, and loss around that. And something that I noticed in the rowing and then the change is that I lose my rhythm and my focus on my vision and my purpose and what matters most when there's that initial transition with change.
Yeah.
And then when I get back into the settling of what the change has brought, the transition has brought, I'm like, oh, okay, there I am. There I am. And then when I changed again, I was completely off rhythm. And so seeing how that's how I behave in life.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing, huh?
Yeah.
Are you open to sharing who and what matters most to you?
um, family matters most. Immediate family and that next layer, like cousins, aunts,
Mhm.
matter most. And seeing also the work that I love doing out in the world is helping families be happy and connected and healthy. And so my focus is on that a lot when I'm out, and that my personality type tends to see the gaps in that because I want to solution it. So a
Totally.
lot of that is just, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that. Thank you. Yeah. I really, you know, the good and bad news to me about somatics is as we start to feel, we feel what's there. And, it's the funny thing about compartmentalizing or trying to feel some things and not feel others, which is not what you said, Kat, but is it's not really how our somas work. Like once we start softening and opening and allowing ourselves to feel more of life, we get the whole gamut. And to me, what's good about that is then we get to learn to feel the whole gamut and then be more and more skillful in the whole range. So I just appreciate you sharing. It's like, oh, there's what matters to you, and then the grief that goes along with it. And then also, I thought you said beautifully about what happens in transition. And one of the reasons I love practicing, excuse me, we have a whole variety of practices that help us center in change, is because I think it's true for most of us. Where we lose ourselves is in all the change. Where we lose ourselves is in the transition. And that we can practice again and again going, oh, wait, I can stay fully present and connected to purpose even during change. That just seems like one of the massive skills that are so important for us, both in our lives, but then also when we're looking at creating systemic change. So thank you. I just think you said it beautifully. Yeah, yeah.
So Staci, if you have time, there's another hand from, I apologize if I mispronounce it, Iorna?
Lorna. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Lorna.
I wanted to rewind just a little, talking about celebration, realizing that I don't know how to celebrate. And when Biden's victory was announced, I went numb. I went into freeze.
Yeah.
And I think what's connected here to what the exercise you just put us through, I find it terribly difficult to just stay with the exercise, I think, or to do, and in fact, I'm almost always doing two things at once. So I'm never quite present.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just wondering if you could speak to that. I think they're connected, right?
Yeah, I would guess so. Well, the first thing I want to say is what a great survival strategy.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. It's like doing two things at once, never having to fully be present, meaning never do we have to fully feel what's happening. And my guess is it helps you numb.
Well, it helped me survive my childhood. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So, the first thing that is really the first thing I want to say is good job. It probably is part of what kept you alive and intact. Yeah. We'll talk about this a little bit later in the session, but when we learn survival strategies, particularly young, but the truth is, even adult traumas can kick in survival strategies. Those survival strategies generalize in our nervous system and in our tissues and in how our endocrine system works, and then we can't not do them. So, I mean, for you, do you find it limiting now that you numb or that you don't know how to celebrate? Like, are those things you wish you could do? Do they matter?
Absolutely. There's a great longing to be here now, and
Yeah.
to feel joy. And I do have moments of feeling joy, but they're always when I'm alone in the garden. Well, also I do coaching, life coaching, and in that there I'm able to really focus on the other and receive. That's one, because I think it's an enclosed and encapsulated
Mhm.
circumstance. Yeah.
Great. That's great. I mean, you know, one of the things, and you're saying this, is like you do have moments of joy in the garden, or you do have moments of joy when there's that contained environment. It's one of the places to really leverage. Like, one thing I appreciate about somatics is somatics asks the question how more than it asks the question why. The why just gets revealed, but the how is like, wow, how in the moments you can feel joy, how does that happen in your body? How do you allow that? And then we really build off of those while simultaneously working with our survival strategies that we can't not do anymore. So we'll get around to a little bit more of this, but I feel like you're naming things that many of us grapple with. So just thanks for your honesty.
Thank you, Staci. It's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, friends, let's dive into resilience. We're going to do resilience, and then we're going to do a bit on survival strategies in our next hour. Resilience is a word that gets thrown around a lot now, and I want to start for a minute with what resilience isn't, and then go into kind of from our somatic viewpoint, what's a somatic definition of resilience. But the first thing is what's resilience isn't, and you can add to the chat if you have more things to add here, is resilience is not a tool of oppression to blame targeted communities, right? Or to excuse oppression. So often this will get used toward poor communities or oppressed communities, like, oh, well, but they're so resilient. Or it'll be used toward kids who are getting hurt. It's like, they're resilient, they'll be fine, they'll get through it. Kids are resilient, right? It's very sad to me, but one of the ways that actually somatic practices of resilience are currently being used by the US military is teaching soldiers resilience processes so that they can send them back into battle more quickly. It's terrible. It's terrible. So what resilience isn't is those things, right? Tools of violence or tools of sustaining violence or tools to blame already targeted communities or excuse oppression. Okay, that is what resilience isn't. We do not want to use resilience for that. What resilience is an inherent capacity. None of us have to learn resilience. It comes with this amazing package, right? With being alive. Resilience is an inherent capacity basically for hope, for joy, for, we all use different words for wholeness. It's this inherent capacity to spring back, right? If we've been hurt or there's too much pressure, we have this inherent resilience to actually pop back. I think of it sometimes like, you know, when you step on moss and the moss pops back, I think of it a little bit like that. But it's this inherent capacity for wholeness, for joy. For some people, we experience it as a deep spiritual connection. And I'm just going to share my screen again and share a definition that we use. And let me make this bigger so hopefully you all can see it. All right, resilience. Resilience is built into us. We actually inherently know how to shift and orient ourselves to a deeply connected, resourceful state or place, a kind of, ground or groundedness in wisdom or hope. It's also one of our ways of bouncing back, right, after traumatic or resilient experiences. It's one of the ways actually that we live through them and keep orienting ourselves toward happiness, toward connection, toward well-being. Okay. I'll talk about it a little bit more later, but we really see that all of us have these inherent needs for safety, for belonging, and for dignity. And our survival reactions, as well as our resilience, are oriented around helping to support and sustain those. So resilience and accessing our resilience helps to bring back safety, connection, and dignity, and also a positive imagination for the future. This is a big part of resilience, is there's a quality of hope inside of it. So it's a body-based experience. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here. And it's inherent, okay? So I want us to kind of dig into this more through experience. And I'm wondering, actually, let me say two more things about research. There's a lot of research around resilience these days. And I want to tell two pieces. One is with a researcher. Her name is Alicia Lieberman, and she works with kids who've witnessed trauma. That's kind of where some of this research came from. And what she found, and you might all relate to some of this, but she found that the kids who were either connected to art, animals, nature, or spirit, that those were four of the core resilience factors for kids who had witnessed violence, either in their homes or their communities, their capacity to bounce back. And she was literally looking at brain development, right? Because trauma affects brain development, which means it affects nervous system development. But these kids, their capacity to work with and work through at the level of the brain, where other kids were having problems with different developmental issues or literally the patterning and the neuronal pathways. Spirit, art, nature, animals. Those were the factors for the kids who actually showed the most resilience at the level of the brain and the nervous system. So to me, these feel very intuitive and feel probably present for many of us in where we find resilience. Another one I want to tell you about, because it's about collective resilience, and I find it so powerful, is there's a South African psychologist. Her name is Pumla Gobodo Madikizela, and I can send these out afterwards if folks want them. But she was a part of the truth and reconciliation process in post-apartheid South Africa, and she still really studies a lot about restorative justice, collective forgiveness. She's amazing, written a lot of books worth reading. But she was looking at Black South African townships during apartheid, when there would be political assassination. So when the state would come in and assassinate activists, what would happen to the township after those assassinations. And what she found is the townships that came together and drummed, danced, and sang together really in some ways got to, through those processes, kind of collectively recenter, collectively process some of the trauma. The intra-community violence decreased. Okay, the violence against each other decreased. In the communities where people isolated, kind of went to their own homes and didn't come together and practice, the intra-community violence increased. And she really looked at that, of what happens in a collective soma, a collective body, when there's trauma toward that collective body, and then what were some of the resilience factors to actually come back together and again decrease violence against each other. Yeah, and basically drum, song, dance, we're part of that. We're part of the collective resilience factors. So I'm going to ask you all for a minute, and we'll just take a couple of moments for this. But when you look at your own life. What are experiences of resilience for you? And you could think of a very particular experience. You know, it could have been a time when you were connected with other people, or you were dancing, or you were writing, you were listening to music. It could have been a time in nature. Maybe it is animals for you. But given our social conditions, we all have a lot of inherent resilience, right? That we're people drawn to healing, and that we're people drawn to activism and social change speaks to our resilience from my view. But what are, just kind of off of the top for you, 2 or 3 experiences that you're like, no, that was an experience of resilience. That brought me hope or a sense of wholeness. And if you can just jot those down on your phone or your computer or a piece of paper, we're going to work with these a little bit.
Can I ask a quick question, Staci?
Please do, yeah.
Do you mean, thanks. Do you mean things that helped us feel resilient, or time, or memories of when we were resilient?
Right now, I'm asking for memories of when you experienced resilience. And does that good?
Yep, thank you.
An example for me, and keep writing, you cannot listen to me, but those of you who want a little bit of support, I grew up in a very small town in the Rockies in Colorado at about 9,100 feet. And nature was way bigger than people, which was awesome because I was living in a household with a lot of violence. And an experience of violence that I remember as a kid is heading out into the woods. It was fall, so the aspen trees were turning colors, but there wasn't snow yet. And I remember being by this blue spruce tree. It's like a pine tree. This blue spruce tree, and the golden leaves from the aspen had fallen over the spruce tree like decorations. And there was a creek close by, and I remember smelling the sweet water of the creek and the sweet grass, and then just watching the leaves fall onto that pine tree. And it was this feeling inside of me of how big and bold nature is, and just like the vastness of nature and the beauty, and like no matter what, it was all going to be okay. And not even like it was all going to be okay in my family, it just all was going to be okay because of how old and vast nature was. That was a very profound experience of resilience for me, and in how I felt connected to something much, much bigger than me. Yeah. So those kind of experiences for you. I love trees. I love pine trees. They are my friends. All right, I'm wondering if there is someone who would be willing to do a brief resilience demo with me. And it's going to be a bit of storytelling from an experience of resilience that you've had. And then we're going to work with it somatically a little bit. And I want to do this demo so then we can all actually head into breakout groups, and in pairs you can do it with each other, right? So that way we'll all get experience of this on this during this session. Hi, thank you for doing this. Hi. I just put you on speaker view, which then I can just really see you. Thanks for doing this.
Hey, you're welcome.
I wonder if you can just kind of tell us in as much detail as you can, almost like putting yourself back in that resilience experience, and just tell us about it. Where are you? What's happening? Who are you with? Yeah.
Oh, immediately some tears kind of come up to the surface. Feel some warmth. I was living in Seattle, having gone through a big wave of trauma in the months prior to this moment. And I was sitting on the porch with two of my housemates, Marina and Anya. And Marina is an artist, and she had brought out like markers and colored pencils and like sheets of like just swaths of paper. And it was just this moment where it was like fall, beautiful golden leaves behind us, and like the sun streaming in on one of those rare sunny days. And oh yeah, it was, I remember saying, this is the happiest I've felt in a really long time. It was like the moment where my body was like, oh, I can be safe. Like that's possible. Like my body hadn't had that memory of safety until that moment for like many months or who knows how long. But
Wow.
yeah, it's just that blip of like people that care about me, that love me, and we're creating beauty within a context of, you know, nature and beauty. So is that enough detail?
Yeah, it's awesome. Can I ask you some questions?
Sure,
and of course, if you, all of your emotions are welcome here. So if you cry, fine. So what did it feel like kind of just seated in the chair you were in?
Well, you know, to be honest, part of it was part of me, you know, imagining myself in that space, part of me still felt kind of frozen. Like I wasn't sure if I could really trust the safety of that moment. So it was like this little, the image is like this little girl, like, is this a safe adult to trust? It was like wanting to trust, but not knowing if I could really fully like let go or trust it or feel the ground. So to answer your question, a little frozen, but a desire to trust.
Okay. And what was it like, just kind of the beauty of the environment, if you really let yourself notice? It's like that sunshine in Seattle, or maybe the smell of the air.
Yeah, that's easier to feel, the safety. It's just like warmth, like deep breaths. Something about that golden light and the golden leaves, just like, yeah, I guess like an expansion in my body. Some relaxation.
Okay, good. And then here's Marina and Anya, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So just let yourself again be there and really notice that they're there.
Yeah.
And that you're like, oh my gosh, I can be connected like this.
Right.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. How does that feel in your body?
Almost like I mean, somatically, like my body wants to collapse in a good way of like, I've been holding, yeah, like relief, like, oh, like I don't have to hold all this tension in alone. It's like I can like sink into their presence and their love. Yeah. It wasn't like an explicit love, but just the fact that they were there creating art with me. Yeah, so just, yeah. Okay. This is what my body is.
Good, that letting go. What do you notice in kind of your heart?
I mean, again, the edges are a little frozen, but I guess a softness. I notice wanting to burp. That's one of my discharge signs of energy. There's a balloon in the sky right now, which seems meaningful. That's so funny. Yeah, my heart just feels a little bit softer, I guess.
Okay. And anything that you notice in your belly or your lower body when you're really sitting there, back in that experience? Marina and Anya are there, the golden light, the art supplies.
Yeah. It's funny, more memories of other resourcing moments come to mind. Like I thought of, another moment of like this beautiful potluck I was at on an island off of Seattle with tons of people that I felt close to. I'm forgetting your question exactly, actually. Just what else I noticed?
In that moment on the porch with them and the golden light, anything that you notice in your belly or your lower body?
Specifically. Yeah. Yeah, just the sense that it had been really hardened before that moment, and a sense that it could breathe a little bit deeper and kind of soften also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, difference between like something tight and something loose, I guess.
Okay. And if you, again, just a little bit longer, as much as you can, be back in that experience. They're there with you. You're doing art, or you're about to do art together. The golden light.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else that you feel in your body that you're just like, oh, this is so resilience giving?
I mean, I feel like some movement in my arms a little bit. Oh, like I kind of have a sense of them kind of like wanting to go above my head and like kind of just like, yes. Yeah, just kind of some upward open movement of my arms.
Mm.
Yeah, I just feel a shift in my body now, just movement of my hips a little bit and like a little deeper breath, thinking about that experience. So just, I guess, general openness and movement.
Great.
Yeah, my hips are really kind of awake now.
Awesome. Okay. All right. One more question. You're doing awesome. Thank you for lingering in resilience.
Of course.
If you could, if this experience could just be just the right amount, would you leave it where it's at? Would you turn it up 2 or 3%? Would you turn it down 2 or 3% to have it just be the right resilience for you now, right? Really in your whole self, in your whole soma.
I would like to turn it up a few percent. I think I can hold it. Just like
see what that's like. Just maybe 2%, 3%. Turning it up and noticing what you feel.
Yeah. Oh. I think it's the more you feel, the more grief you also make space for. So
yeah.
There's that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the deeper breath's also coming more.
And aliveness in your hips still?
It feels more again the end of the, I think the hips were kind of the peak. I feel a little more like the collapse of like the cycle again. So maybe just some flatter, but more open energy still too. Just the relief.
That's right. Okay.
Oh, it's a lot to feel that actually. It's just the waves.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like resilience is so life-giving, and also it's really a part of opening us, changing us, and bringing some of those forward.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure for you that turning it up was the right thing. Like, did that feel more resilience giving, or did having it back down where you started feel more resilience giving?
It's hard to answer with kind of a, I don't know if a value judgment. Not that you're asking me for a value judgment, but I guess what I notice is intensity. So maybe, yeah, it's hard to say. Maybe keeping it where it was might have tempered that a little bit, but yeah.
Something you can just ponder.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, it's mostly we just want to go, wow, we can turn it up, we can turn it down. And then what is the most resourcing or resilience giving?
Yeah.
And I think, I tend to notice, those of us who are, in social justice work or in healing tend to lean toward going for the intensity.
Exactly.
But the intensity is not always the most resilience giving. It's just the most intense.
Yeah.
And sometimes some of us who need to and learn to over contain will keep it turned down, even though that might not be the most resilience giving. So really the guide in this whole process is what brings the most resource, aliveness, hope, letting go. Like yours was much more about like, oh, finally I can let down.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So something you can just play with yourself inside of here.
Thanks. That really resonates. I think I always am like, let's do the biggest amount of work possible right now. Go for the big feelings. But yeah. So
Yeah.
being mindful about how much I can actually contain. So thanks for
And what's resourcing, what's resourcing. Yeah. Trauma moves us toward intensity, and intensity is not always the most resourcing, and we have to resettle ourselves back down to this other kind of pool. Yeah. Anything else you want to share that you want to tell us before we pivot?
Not in particular, maybe just gratitude for kind of asking us to think of resourcing memories. And it was sweet to go back into the archives. It's like, oh wow, I didn't know I remembered that moment as a resourcing moment. It's nice to have those options available to think about. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for being willing to share publicly. I appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. I noticed that there are a couple of hands up. Kazu, will you help us call on folks?
Sure. Tessa, I know you had a hand up as well.
Yeah, thank you, Kazu, and thank you, Staci. I think I'm just feeling grateful for coming back into those memories. It's lovely to re-immerse myself in those beautiful spaces and to recognize that, like the children, every single one has either to do with drumming, dance, spirit, nature, art, animals. Like it's just so basic. So it's like, oh, right, okay, that's like clockwork.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to answer any questions people have, but this little storytelling process, I want to invite us to get to do with each other. So like if Tess and I ended up being partners, we decide who's going first. And then it would really be speaking from one of those experiences. And as a partner, just asking, how does that feel in your body? Or can you tell me more details? Right? That we're really listening and we're inviting each other into very much the specific experience of the resilience, and then linger there. Like, how do we linger in resilience so it can kind of percolate into our bodies? Or we can just let it deepen a little bit more or resource a little bit more. In the big picture, where we're going is that we can purposefully practice resilience to keep building this capacity and recognizing it in ourselves. So we don't have to wait for resilience to happen to us, but we can purposefully practice things that we know bring us resilience, or do this recollection practice where we keep finding that and then lingering in it in our somas. It really helps to, again, purposely train our nervous system towards resilience, which is a good counterbalance to a lot of the other things we have to deal with in this world. So, are there any questions before we break into pairs and get a chance to do this together?
Gail, I see your hand. I don't know if did you have a question? No. Ginny, I see your hand.
Yeah, I'll just say uh, this is something that I feel like I should bring to therapy this week, but it was shockingly hard for me to come up with examples of experiences of resilience. And I think I'm noticing that it has a lot to do with some conditioning from childhood trauma around just kind of subsuming my own strength, my own voice, and being centered in myself, and how hard that can be for me, and compartmentalizing and over intellectualizing. And I'm sitting with the shock and surprise at how hard this exercise was. So appreciating you all for giving me the opportunity to kind of tap into that.
Yeah, Ginny, I really appreciate you saying this. It isn't fully accessible, especially depending on kind of the combinations of trauma or oppression we may have experienced. And so mostly I just want to say that and respect that. It's like the wisdom of survival strategies that are like, nope, we're not going to feel that. You know, one of the things for me in having worked, you know, experienced a lot of trauma and also working with trauma for a long time is I really orient from this place of we are more powerful than what happened to us because here we are still. And I don't know if that works for other people, but it's really a baseline that I move from. So either, you know, and I notice there's someone else in the chat too, Leah, that you're saying you're having a hard time. Either you can stay in the main room and we can just chat while other people are doing their breakout. Or if there's very simple things like the wind, if you like the feeling of the wind and that feels resourcing. Or if there's an animal that you're close to and just like the feeling of their fur, if it's an animal with fur, but taking something very simple from your current life that brings you a sense of pleasure. You can just start with something very brief like that and go, well, what does that feel like in my body? And see what happens with that. Ginny, how does that sound to you?
That sounds great, Staci. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So if you have, so the basic piece is tell a story, be in that story as much as possible, and then just report, what do you notice in your body? Does your chest expand? Do you warm? Is there more aliveness in your lower body? And obviously you'll be having those sensations now. You don't have to exactly feel what it felt like then, but really being back in the experience, or take something very simple like we just talked about with Ginny from your current day life that brings pleasure or connection or joy or a sense of well-being. We're gonna do, I'm looking at our time, we'll do 5 minutes per person, and maybe Kazu, we can note when it's halftime and time to switch. But tell the story, how does it feel in your body? Have it be as detailed as possible and to the level that's most resilience giving for you, okay? So y'all open to experimenting with each other? All right.
Activists who are kind of grounded in these principles, like the more we escalate our tactics of nonviolent resistance, the more we tend to escalate this like polarized us versus them worldview. So how we double down on that, even as the tactics escalate, is the thing that we're exploring a lot.
That's right. That's very cool. Welcome back. I have a feeling that probably wasn't long enough, but thanks for working with our time. I'm wondering if you're open just to drop into chat a sentence about what you learned or how you're doing. More spacious, resourced, present, connected. capable in my heart. I will let you know about where to find me more at the end. Oh, nice. Resilience comes from interacting with other people. There's another great, Judith Lewis Herman. She's the one who does a lot of research that shows connection with other people being a resilience factor. I just didn't want to go through all the research. Awesome. Oh, that's nice. All right, thank you for sharing some in the chat. We just have about 15 more minutes, and I wanted to, well, I had much more on my agenda than we actually had time for, which is sadly typical for me. I get really excited. But I do want to talk a little bit about a somatic understanding of trauma and really, really honor and respect our inherent survival strategies. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and then we'll do a collective resilience piece to close today. So my guess is you all have heard of fight, flight, freeze, appease, and dissociate. Yeah, these are our friends. The really, really interesting things are these are automatic responses to threat, and we did not have to learn them. Yeah, all of these are actually they're inherent. They come with our psychobiologies, or how I think of it as these are part of our evolutionary wisdom. Fight, flight, freeze, appease, and dissociate. And one of the things that happens with trauma is that these responses in us come to the foreground and kind of take over when we are threatened. And I want to loop back around for a minute. In kind of our orientation inside of somatics, we really hold that safety, belonging, and dignity are inherent needs for all human beings. Safety, right, for ourselves and those that we identify with. Belonging, because we're a social animal. We're not isolatory animals. Yeah, we're social animals, like we're kind of herd animals or pack animals. Throwing people in isolation is one of the worst things we can do to human beings. Yeah, because we're pack animals. And then dignity or worth, right? Inherent dignity or worth. These are three needs: safety, belonging, and dignity. Three needs. And you know, I think sometimes that what a powerful statement Black Lives Matter is, because it's basically in this very powerful way saying exactly that, right? Black Lives Matter. Safety matters for our peoples. Belonging matters for our peoples. Dignity matters, right? It's just such a powerful way to point to, right, a system that does not respect or uplift the safety, belonging, and dignity of Black communities, right? And how essential it is to have that be systemically supported. So when safety, belonging, and dignity is threatened by trauma or threatened systemically, right, by systemic oppression, we have automatic ways that we react. And those are fight, flight, freeze, appease, and dissociate. What happens in trauma, right, why we get traumatized, is that those reactions generalize in our psychobiologies. They generalize in our bodies, and then they keep triggering off even when they're not needed. It's like those survival strategies become non-responsive to current time. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's like, I have this list of questions for when I die. If there's any universal force to talk to, this is one of my core questions, is why do they generalize, and why do we suffer with these for decades to come? Why don't they self-resolve? I won't share my other questions, but I have a lot of questions. One of the powerful things about somatics, when we start working through the body, is we can help those survival strategies resolve in our somas. So they're not generalizing and they're not enacting even when we don't need them. So let's say that a really, really smart way to respond was to freeze, right? That frozenness can show up decades later in our relationships, in our activism, in how bold we feel about having like bold visions, right? Or appeasing can last for a long time. And of course, it's reinforced by oppressive conditions. Yeah. So I want to have us do, time goes so fast. I want to have us do one thing together, and then we're going to go into a closing process. Can everyone just close your fist? And then with your other fist, try to pry open this fist. Yeah, like you're trying to pry it open. It's frustrating. You want it to stop doing what it's doing. And just try to pry that fist open. Yeah, and what do you notice happens with this fist? You can chat it or you can take yourself off mute. Right, it gets tighter, right? Gets tighter. I noticed my breath also got higher in my chest. Yeah, and then there was frustration between my hands too, because this wanted this to do something different, okay? Imagine these are our survival strategies. This is those times when you appease when you didn't want to appease. This is the automatic fight bump that just pops out for some of us. Or this is the freeze, right? This is an embodied survival reaction that probably had a lot to do with us being as intact as we are, but gets in the way of a lot of things that we care about now, okay? So now let's do this again. Here's our fist. And this time in this hand, just get really present. And what we're going to do in a moment is very gently support this fist exactly in the direction it's going. Almost like what we're doing is honoring the wisdom of that fist. So be present, don't have a big agenda in your other hand, and support the fist in the direction it's going pretty gently. Notice what happens in that fist and notice what happens in the rest of your body. And then let me know what you noticed. Softens a bit, tears, relaxes. I noticed my breath dropped instead of got high in my body. Everything relaxed. Okay. This, still tighten your chest, but it softens. This is a principle that we in our work call blending. And there are really three main ways that we work with these survival strategies that get generalized in our systems. And obviously we can't do a deep dive, but I at least want to tell you what they are, and then we're going to go toward completing. We want to, when we find these in our somas and ourselves, these contractions or numbness or freezing, one of the first things we want to do is blend and befriend. At a somatic level, we're supporting the contraction or the numbness in the direction it's going while we're starting to honor what that took care of. So instead of going, what's wrong with that survival strategy, we say, what did that take care of for you? What did that take care of for me? And there's usually a very long list of what is taken care of. Yeah. Blend and befriend is always the first thing we do. The second thing we do is we learn new practices to build the skills that this survival strategy never let us build. If I've appeased for many years, I usually don't know how to have a centered boundary. If I've fought for many years, I usually didn't learn to be very receptive. There's skills that the survival strategy taught us, while meanwhile, there's a whole bunch of other embodied skills we didn't learn. So we start to learn those embodied skills through practice. And the last thing is allyship. Because we're social animals, I think there's a deep biological expectation in us to ally with each other and have each other's backs. And most of us didn't have that experience. So there's a somatic process we do of allying and being allied with. Those are the three pieces that we work with that really help that kind of over exuberant survival strategy, right? That's generalized in our somas to help it transform. So maybe in the future I can come back and that can be the focus, because I love working with that stuff. But it also felt very important today to focus on resilience because of all we've been carrying and all we have kind of sustained through over these last 4 years and also over this last year. So Kazu, I'm going to hand it to you for closing comments, and then we'll do a collective resilience practice before we go today.
Thank you so much, Staci. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us, especially today of all the days and in this moment in our history. I think it was so important. I just want to share my screen one more time for a very brief presentation here. Just want to bring us back to the gift economy one last time before we close. As people who have been to our longer workshops know, for us, committing to a process of the gift economy means many different things based around these 7 principles. We're not going to have time to go through them all, but we do just want to share a little bit about the 6th principle around transparency, because financial transparency is something that we take very seriously. Anyone can go on our website and see our budget and our updated financials every quarter as they come out. And also, as part of our fiscal transparency, we want to let folks know that going into next year, we are in the first year of a 3-year grant of $100,000 a year. And so we've never been more financially stable. And so right now, as an organization, all of our financial needs are met. Part of the commitment to the gift economy is also about being mindful of what our needs are and not taking more than what our actual needs are, and getting out of this like constant growth mentality of capitalism that oftentimes seeps into social justice organizations as well. And so our needs are met. So we won't be holding on to any of the income that we receive from this workshop. And Staci, in her generosity, is also forwarding her funds from this workshop to the Community Ready Corps and the Arab Resource Organizing Center. And so any donations that you give in response to this workshop will go to those 2 organizations. And I always love to end with this quote: when giving is done out of pure joy, you can't tell who the giver is and who the recipient is. And a gift economy system is really about cultivating generosity, and real generosity should give you joy, right? So when you think about what might be a good amount for you to give, I want all of us to picture this image and just ask yourself who's getting more joy out of that interaction, the little boy or the duck. And whatever the amount is that gives you that sense of joy, where you can't tell if you're actually the person giving the donation or you're getting something out of it, that's the right amount. And again, we will email you this link, but if you go to eastpointpeace.org/Staci donate, we'll be able to track it. And again, all of those donations will be shared between the Community Ready Corps and Arab Resource Organizing Center. So I want to thank you all for joining this call, and thank you, Staci, one more time, and I'll hand the mic back to you for our closing.
Delighted. That is so inspiring. I mean, just even that feels so good. I think I'm having that I'm adding to this to my resilience. I'm going to play something and invite us to be in the felt experience of resilience together. This is the resistant survival chorus. Can everybody put themselves on mute? There we go. It's a resistance revival chorus. You might have seen them because they've been posting a lot of YouTubes, but this is song, and then it's song just about life. If you have to go right at the hour, go for it. It's about 3 minutes, so we'll go a little bit over. But as we're watching together, if you can both just remind yourself, we're watching this in community, and then also let it touch you. For some of you, it might be really resilience giving. For others, just a great song. But this gives us a way to get to do this together. And just give me 1 second, because I didn't have it pulled up how I wanted to. Okay, now. All right. Here we come. Just feeling yourselves and knowing we're in this together. Let's.
This joy that I have, the world didn't give it to me. Oh, this joy that I have.
Staci, I think the sound went off when you muted yourself.
Give it, the world can't take it away. This strength that I have, this strength that I have, this strength that I have. Oh yeah, now. The world can't give it to me. The world can't give it to me. This strength that I have. Oh yeah, the world didn't give it to me. The world didn't give it to me. This strength that I have. Oh yeah, the world didn't give it to me. Oh, I said the world didn't give it. The world can't take it away. Oh, this love that I have. This love that I have. Oh, yeah, now. The world didn't give it to me. The world didn't give it to me. This love that I have. Oh, yeah. The world didn't give it to me. Don't you know that this love that I have, yeah, the world didn't give it to me. Singing, the world didn't give it. The world can't take it away. This pride that I have, this pride that I have, this pride that I have. Oh yeah, now. The world didn't give it to me. The world didn't give it to me. This pride that I have. I said the world didn't give it to me. Don't you know that this pride that I have, yeah, the world didn't give it to me. Oh, I said the world didn't give it. The world can't take it away. All this peace that I have. The world didn't give it to me. The world didn't give me my peace that I have. Oh yeah, now. The world didn't give it to me. Won't you sing about peace that I have? Oh yeah, now. The world didn't give it to me. I said the world didn't give it. The world can't take it away. Oh, this joy that I have, this joy that I have. This joy that I have. Oh yeah, now. The world didn't give it to me. The world didn't give it to me. This joy that I have. I said the world didn't give it to me. Don't you know that this joy that I have, the world didn't give it to me. Oh, I said the world didn't give it. The world can't take it away. The world didn't give it, and the world can't take it away. The world didn't give it. The world can't take it away. The world didn't give it, and the world can't take it away. The world can't take it away. The world didn't give it, and the world can't take it away. The world didn't give it. The world can't take it away.
Resistance Revival Chorus believes in the words written by the poet Toy Derricott when she wrote, "Joy is an act of resistance." We believe in the words of Mr. Harry Belafonte, who said, "When the movement is strong, the music is strong." We sing to revive the hearts of those who fight for social justice, and we sing together for freedom.
Thanks for watching.
2020 was different, to say the least. We had virtual dance parties and ordered tickets.
The automatic of YouTube to the next video. Thank you all so much for just sharing time together and practice together this morning. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Staci. So I want to invite everyone to come off of mute and just shower Staci with your appreciation, and we will end with that.
Thank you, Staci.
Thank you so much, Staci.
So much.
Thank
you,
Staci.
Thank you,
Kazu.
Appreciate you.
That was
Thank
wonderful.
you.
Needed that.
So rewarding.